She poisoned her husband, her own mother, and even her patients. And just hours before her execution, she sat sipping Coca-Cola and asked for forgiveness. Since 1976, the state of North Carolina has executed 43 death row inmates. Many left this world in silence, but some left behind a final meal that raised eyebrows and last words that still haunt to this day. What does a killer choose as their final feast before facing death? And if they know the end is near, what will they say if given one last chance? This is a list of the 10 most brutal inmates ever executed in North Carolina, along with their last meals and final words. Before we begin, drop a comment. Which country or state are you watching from? Let's see how far these stories travel. And now we begin with the man who threw an entire state into panic on one summer night in 1984. First, James William Hutchins, May 31, 1979, Rutherford County, Western North Carolina. It was a hot and quiet summer day like any other. But in a small wooden house off a rural road where the Hutchins family lived, that silence was about to shatter. James William Hutchins, 50 years old, was a man with a troubled past, a former soldier, an ex-convict, a father who once promised to live better for his kids. But promises like those were never enough to calm the rage inside him. And that morning, his 17-year-old daughter had just come back from a graduation party. When Hutchins discovered she had mixed alcohol into her drink, he exploded in anger. There was shouting. Things got broken. Frightened, the girl ran out of the house and called the police. When Sheriff Roy Husky arrived at the scene, he had no idea the man inside was already waiting with a loaded gun. No warning, no time to react. Husky was shot dead on the doorstep. It didn't end there. Hutchins got in his car and drove off. But minutes later, he encountered 2 more officers, Deputy Owen Messersmith and Trooper Robert L. Peterson, who were setting up a roadblock in response to the emergency call. At a bend along the Blue Ridge Mountains, gunfire erupted again. By the end of that morning, 3 lawmen were dead. The state of North Carolina was shaken. Over 200 officers from the FBI, state police, and local agencies swarmed into Rutherford County. Roadblocks went up. Forests were locked down. 12 hours later, Hutchins was found hiding in an abandoned cabin. He did not resist. He simply raised his hands and said, "I knew you'd come." His trial took place in September that same year. The jury didn't need much time. Hutchins was sentenced to death, 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 of second-degree. He became the first person in North Carolina to receive the death penalty after it was reinstated in 1977. But it wasn't until March 16, 1984, that the sentence was carried out at Central Prison in Raleigh. Under the prison lights, James Hutchins faced his fate. He declined to request a special last meal, but around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, officers brought him a simple tray, a hamburger, and a soft drink. No requests, no complaints, and when asked for any last words, Hutchins simply shook his head. Nothing to say. No apology. No plea. No remorse. Only silence, colder than the stone walls surrounding him. Second, Velma Barfield, Fayetteville, North Carolina, 1978. In a small house on the edge of town, Stuart Taylor, a kind and quiet middle-aged man, collapsed shortly after dinner which had been prepared by his girlfriend. He was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. Initial diagnosis, heart failure. But the family was suspicious. They found checks with forged signatures cashed after Taylor had already died. Authorities ordered an autopsy, the results arsenic poisoning. And the only person with regular access to his food and medicine was Velma Barfield. Velma, 52 years old, was no stranger to the community. She was a part-time nurse, a churchgoer. She had cared for her elderly mother, sick patients, and frail husbands. During questioning, she confessed. She had poisoned food before, not just for Taylor, but for her own mother, 2 former husbands, and 2 elderly patients. Police concluded 6 people had died. All of them had eaten her food, taken the medicine she gave them, and trusted her as the one person they could rely on. In December of 1978, Velma was sentenced to death for the murder of Stuart Taylor. During the 6 years she spent on death row, she became a devout Christian. She gained support from several religious leaders, including Reverend Billy Graham. A clemency request was sent to the governor. He denied it. On the night of November 2, 1984, Velma Barfield was led to the execution chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. She became the first woman in the United States to be executed since 1962, and the first in North Carolina to die by lethal injection. She didn't ask for a fancy last meal. She requested a bag of cheese doodles and a can of Coca-Cola. When asked for any final words, she looked at the officers. Her voice was calm, nearly a whisper. "I know that everyone has suffered greatly, all the families involved, and I am sorry. I want to thank everyone who supported me over these 6 years." Third, Phillip Lee Ingle, Cherryville, North Carolina, summer of 1991. A peaceful little town was shaken by 2 horrifying murders. Within less than 2 months, 2 elderly couples were brutally killed inside their own homes. On July 28, 1991, William Fred Davis, 68 years old, and his wife Margaret Shufford, Davis, 67, were found dead in their home. 2 weeks later, on September 9th, E.Z. Willis, 70 years old, and his wife Sarah Willis, 67, were murdered in a nearly identical fashion. The 2 couples lived close by, and there were no signs of robbery or a clear motive. Investigation stalled until a friend of Phillip Lee Ingle came forward reporting that Ingle had confessed to the killings. Ingle, 30 years old, had once lived near the Davis family. He had a long history of mental illness and alcoholism. He had previously attempted suicide and been treated at psychiatric facilities. In his confession, Ingle claimed he saw the victims as demons with red eyes, horns, and tails, and believed he was doing the work of God. The trial took place in February of 1993. Ingle was sentenced to death for 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree burglary. Despite his mental health history, experts determined that he was legally competent to stand trial. Ingle refused to appeal, saying he wanted the victims' families to find peace and not suffer any longer. On September 22, 1995, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Phillip Lee Ingle was executed by lethal injection. Before his death, he was served a last meal of a medium-rare steak, a baked potato, a tossed salad, and butter pecan ice cream. When asked for his final words, Ingle said, "I do not believe in the death penalty. Even though I chose to end my appeals early, the only reason I'm doing this is so the victims' families can find peace and closure. Over the past 4 weeks, I've felt more love and care than I've ever known. I've received letters from across North Carolina and the United States saying they love me, and speaking of God's love for all of us, and I want to thank them. I want to thank my family and all the brothers on death row, some of the best people I've ever met. We're all human. We make mistakes. We are all sinners. When Jesus died, he took away the sting of death, so death no longer hurts. I have repented for my sins. I have been forgiven. I am no longer afraid of dying. I am not trembling. I'm just being put to sleep, and angels will carry me to heaven. I forgive you and everyone. And I ask anyone I've hurt to please forgive me." Moments later, his voice was heard no more. Fourth, Samuel Russell Flippen, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, morning of February 12, 1994. Tina Gibson left home for an early shift at work. Staying behind in the apartment were her 2-year-old daughter, Brittany Nicole Hutton, and her fiancé, Samuel Flippen, 25 years old. Less than an hour later, Flippen called 911. He said Brittany had fallen from a high chair and was struggling to breathe. When paramedics arrived, they found the child pale and motionless, despite emergency treatment at Baptist Hospital. Brittany died shortly after. An autopsy revealed something far worse: severe trauma to her liver and pancreas, consistent with a powerful blow to the abdomen. The medical examiner confirmed a fall from a high chair could not have caused those injuries. Flippen claimed he had only stepped out of the room for a moment. He had no criminal record, no history of drug use. Friends described him as quiet and kind, but his fiancée, Tina, testified that he had been violent in the past. That was enough for authorities to arrest him and charge him with first-degree murder. The trial was held in 1995. Flippen was sentenced to death. In 1997, the sentence was overturned for reconsideration of mitigating factors. But after more than 6 hours of deliberation, a new jury upheld the death penalty. Over the next 11 years, Flippen consistently maintained his innocence. Brittany's biological father, John Hutton, publicly opposed the execution, saying the case still had too many unanswered questions. On August 18, 2006, in Raleigh, inside the execution chamber at Central Prison, Samuel Flippen became the most recent person to be executed in North Carolina to this day. He did not request a special last meal. The prison provided a basic tray popcorn shrimp, French fries, hush puppies, and a can of Coca-Cola. When asked for any final words, Flippen shook his head. He turned, looked directly into the eyes of his parents seated behind the glass. He smiled softly and said, "I love you." 5th, David Lawson. Concord, North Carolina, night of December 4th, 1980. Wayne Shin, 34 years old, returned home after a day at work. As he stepped inside, he found a stranger rummaging through his belongings. Before Wayne could react, the intruder opened fire, killing him on the spot. Wayne's father, Burren Shin, heard the commotion and rushed to the scene. He was also shot, but survived and was able to describe the attacker. Police quickly identified the suspect as David Lawson, 25 years old, a man with a criminal record for theft who had once lived nearby. The trial took place in 1981. Lawson was charged with first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and burglary. In court, Lawson admitted to his actions and even asked for the death penalty, saying, "If you think I did it, execute me. I don't want to live in prison for a crime I didn't commit." His defense attorney tried to present mitigating factors, including mental illness and a history of childhood abuse, but the jury still recommended the death sentence. On June 15, 1994, at Central Prison in Raleigh, David Lawson became the first person to be executed by gas chamber in North Carolina in over 30 years. He had refused lethal injection, saying that choosing the method of execution would make him complicit in the system. As he was strapped into the gas chamber chair, Lawson began shouting, "I am a human being. I am a human being." His final words, just before the chamber was sealed, were, "I am a human being, no more and no less than anyone else. What North Carolina is doing to me is no more right than what I did to Wayne Shin. I am sorry for killing Wayne Shin. I hope North Carolina will one day regret killing me." The execution took around 10 minutes. Afterward, the state implemented additional safety measures in the gas chamber and eventually shifted to lethal injection as the sole method of execution. Lawson had requested a medium-rare steak, but was instead served a well-done steak. He complained to the warden, who told him the decision came from the governor, who had denied the change. In the end, he ate the well-done steak, a slice of apple pie, and refused coffee, saying he did not want to stay awake. 6th, Ronald Wayne Frye. Hickory, North Carolina, night of January 24th, 1993. The air was cool and still. A narrow red dirt road led to a quiet mobile home, silent like every other night. But inside, where dim yellow lights flickered and the smell of liquor mixed with old cooking grease, the atmosphere was heavy as lead. Ralph Childress, 70 years old, lived alone, a retired man, gruff but kind. His tenant, Ronald Frye, 34, was unemployed. He had once worked in construction, loading docks, but now scraped by on beer, cigarettes, and tense conversations about overdue rent. It started with a complaint, then harsh words, then yelling, then silence, and then, as Frye later confessed, he snapped. In his hand a pair of scissors, and Ralph, a man who had survived war and loss, would not survive that night. 3 days later, Frye was found asleep on the porch of an abandoned laundromat. He didn't run. He didn't resist. At the police station, he said, "I didn't mean to kill him. Something just broke in my head." He couldn't afford a lawyer. The court appointed one, Tom Portwood. It was later revealed that during the trial, Portwood drank more than 12 glasses of rum every day. He called no witnesses, presented no mitigating evidence, and never once mentioned Frye's childhood. No one told the jury that Ronald Frye had been abandoned as an infant, that he grew up in foster care, and was adopted by an alcoholic man who abused him severely throughout his childhood. No one told them Frye had tried to take his own life twice by the age of 16. No psychiatrist ever took the stand. The trial was swift. The jury heard about one death and one confession. It took them less than a day to recommend the death penalty. Nearly 8 years later, on August 31st, 2001, Ronald Frye was led into the execution chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. No one came to see him in his final days. No goodbyes, no pleading. He did not request a last meal. When asked for any final words, he shook his head. He did not glance toward the glass window where a family might have sat, because there was no one left to call family. And then, the only sound left was the pen signing his death certificate. 7th, Ricky Lee Sanderson, Davidson County, North Carolina, mid-March, 1985. 16-year-old Susie Marie Holloman vanished on her way to school. She never came home. Police launched a search. Volunteers combed through suburbs, lakes, and wooded areas, but found nothing. A month later, her body was discovered in a shallow grave on a patch of abandoned land. Her body showed signs of a fatal attack. No witnesses, no clear leads. The case shocked the entire county. Fear spread. A suspect was arrested and brought to trial. But just weeks before the sentencing, something unexpected happened. In 1987, while serving a life sentence plus 110 years for 2 unrelated sexual assaults, Ricky Lee Sanderson, a state prison inmate, sent a letter to the prosecutor. In it, he confessed to killing Susie Holloman. He didn't ask for a reduced sentence. He didn't ask for mercy. He simply wrote, "I can't let an innocent man die for something I did." The investigation was reopened. Sanderson's confession matched details from the crime scene location, wounds, even the color of Susie's jacket that day. The previously accused man was released, and Sanderson was transferred to Davidson County to stand trial for first-degree murder. In 1988, he was sentenced to death. For nearly a decade, he filed no appeals. He never asked to delay the execution. Sanderson believed that prolonging the legal process only extended the pain for the Holloman family. A family that, as he said, deserves peace more than anyone. On January 30th, 1998, in Raleigh, at Central Prison, Ricky Lee Sanderson walked into the execution chamber. He became the final death row inmate in North Carolina to choose the gas chamber, just as the state was preparing to move entirely to lethal injection. When asked why he chose gas over the more humane method, he replied, "I need to feel the pain as part of my repentance." He refused a last meal. His reason left many silent aborted children never had a first meal. "I won't have a last one," in memory of them. But on the afternoon before his execution, he used his prison account to buy a single honey bun from the commissary. That was all. Was inside the gas chamber. As the cyanide gas began to flow, witnesses heard him speak calmly. "I die for what I did, and I deserve this death. I am grateful that Christ has forgiven me." 8. Willie Ervin Fisher, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, early morning, April 2nd, 1992. The neighborhood was quiet. Inside a small home, a mother and daughter slept soundly. Angela Johnson, 29 years old, lay in bed next to her young son, unaware that the man who once shared her life and fathered her child had just slipped in through the back door. Willie Ervin Fisher and Angela had shared a long, troubled relationship. Love, dependency, violence. Both had struggled with addiction. Their fights were frequent and often bitter, but this wasn't another fight. It was an attack. Fisher carried a knife and a broken broomstick, his mind clouded by alcohol, drugs, and overwhelming jealousy. Angela was attacked with extreme violence, so much so that the medical examiner had to pause during testimony to regain composure. The murder unfolded before the eyes of Angela's mother and her daughter, both powerless to stop it. Fisher was arrested just hours later. When asked why he did it, he shook his head, repeating, I don't know, I just know I lost everything." At his 1993 trial, Fisher didn't deny the crime. He confessed, but argued that he was not fully conscious of his actions. Psychologist Dr. James Gary Hoover testified that Fisher was in a state of mental breakdown from substance abuse, but the jury was unmoved. They saw no justification for such brutality, especially with a young mother murdered in front of her child. They ruled the murder was both excessively cruel and committed during unlawful entry grounds for the death penalty. Nearly 8 years later, on March 9, 2001, Fisher entered the execution chamber at Central Prison in Raleigh. He was 39 years old, his hair now graying, a different man than the panicked one from years earlier. Before the execution, he recorded a video addressed to Governor Mike Easley, expressing deep remorse and pleading to live so he could serve God and do good from prison. His request for clemency was denied. Fisher made no special request for a last meal, and when the warden asked if he had any final words, he bowed his head and said, "No matter what is seen, or what people think they see, there is still love, mercy, and justice, because God said all that He created is good, and when you believe that, everything will be all right." Then, the room fell silent, as if the walls themselves had heard enough. 9th, Ernest West Basden, Duplin County, North Carolina, night of January 20th, 1992. Winter winds swept across empty fields. Frost clung to car hoods. In a remote corner of the countryside, no one noticed the car pulled over on the roadside. Its headlights just turned off. Behind the wheel sat Billy Carlisle White, 38 years old, an insurance agent. He believed he was meeting a new client for what seemed like a routine appointment. But waiting in the shadows wasn't a client. It was Ernest West Basden, 39 years old, holding a pistol, his hand trembling slightly. Was it from the cold, from fear, or the lingering haze of pills taken earlier? No one really knows. Basden wasn't acting alone. He was the final link in a conspiracy that had started somewhere else in the home of Sylvia White, the victim's wife, and her nephew, James Linwood Taylor. Together, they had plotted Billy's murder to collect a life insurance payout. Sylvia, who had once served time for the death of her own child, convinced Taylor that her husband was abusive and that she needed a way out. Taylor, an informant and small-time drug dealer, didn't carry out the murder himself. Instead, he recruited his uncle, Ernest Basden, a former laborer, now jobless, broken, numbed by alcohol and desperation. Taylor took Basden out for drinks, gave him drugs, and promised an easy job. No thinking, no questions. There would be cash in the morning. Basden agreed. That night, as Billy White stepped out of his car to shake hands with the man he thought was a client, 2 shots rang out. He collapsed instantly, never knowing what had hit him. Tens of thousands of dollars in insurance money were about to be claimed, and the man who pulled the trigger, he was paid just $300. At his 1993 trial, Ernest Basden was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Meanwhile, Taylor and Sylvia White took plea deals and received life sentences. Notably, Sylvia had previously been convicted for killing her stepchild in 1973. On December 6, 2002, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Ernest Basden, 50 years old, was executed by lethal injection. He did not request a special last meal. Instead, he ate the same menu as the other inmates' fried veal, brown gravy, mashed potatoes, 3-bean salad, mixed vegetables, sliced bread, an orange, and fruit juice. Before his execution, Basden said, "I killed Billy White. I'm sorry for that, and I pray that his family can forgive me and allow time to heal their wounds. That's all we can do." 10. John William Rook, Raleigh, North Carolina, evening of May 12, 1980. The air was warm, soft, a peaceful spring night. Like so many others in this college town, walking home from a shift at Wake Medical Center, Anne-Marie Roche, 24 years old, made her way past the quiet intersection of Avant Ferry Road and Lake Raleigh Road. She clutched her jacket. Taking steady steps through the calm, she didn't know someone was waiting. A tall man with a ponytail, holding something metal in his hand. He came from behind. The only known witness, a driver passing by later, said he saw the man strike Anne-Marie on the head, then drag her into a parked brown Mercury. She was forced inside, and then she was gone. 3 days later, her body was found in a wooded area. Anne-Marie had endured a brutal assault. Her body showed signs of a violent struggle and was found near the same vehicle used in her abduction. The Mercury was traced back to a neighbor, but at the time of the murder, it had been loaned to someone else, John William Rook, 21 years old. Police tracked him down within hours. During questioning, Rook confessed almost immediately to the kidnapping, the assault, and the murder, no hesitation. The trial took place in 1981. The defense attempted to paint a more complex picture that Rook had grown up in a dysfunctional, abusive home, that he had a low IQ and showed signs of severe psychological distress, but none of it was enough. What Anne-Marie suffered, and the planning behind Rook's actions, led the jury to uphold the death sentence. On September 19, 1986, inside Central Prison in Raleigh. As the moment of execution approached, Rook was asked about his final meal. He didn't hesitate. He requested something simple yet strange in quantity: 12 hot dogs. No buns, no special drinks, just hot dogs, perhaps a final act of indifference. As officers secured the straps for lethal injection, Rook wore a faint, dreamy smile, and before the chemicals entered his body, he looked toward the glass, not searching for anyone, but speaking as if to himself. "Freedom. Freedom at last. My friend, the cells are silent now. 10 executions. 10 lives. No two the same, but all ending in the same thing: silence. From hatred and jealousy to calculated plans for money, each death leaves behind a haunting question. Was justice truly served? Or was this just one sliver of a deeper, broken system where the victim's pain and the killer's ruin vanish together behind cold steel doors? If this story made you think, subscribe to the channel for more deep dive true crime stories. And don't forget to comment below. Which of these cases left the deepest mark on you?